Welcome everyone to another Cork Humanists meeting. It's good to see some familiar faces. On the news front, we currently don't have a meeting organised for next month, but stay tuned on that front. In terms of the meeting that we're going to have today, I'd ask that you put your phones on silent.
Sorry, that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to remind me, thank you so much. And in terms of the humanism news in general, at the moment there's I suppose the most interesting thing happening at the moment is rumblings within the HEI regarding the Civil Registration Amendment Act 2002. The story there is, I'll try to put it as briefly as possible. Basically, for the past 10 years, the HEI have been campaigning so that their celebrants can solemnise marriages just like the religious. In order to solemnise marriages, they had to sign a document saying that they were religion, and obviously they didn't sign it. So, if you want to get a humanist celebrant, you could have the celebration in your garden, but then you had to go to the registry office and get it signed. So that would be the actual legal solemnisation of your marriage would be at the Civil Registration Office. Basically, then the HEI campaigned and got Joan Burton and Ivana Bacek, the atheist activist extraordinaire, to draft some legislation which was put forward. They did a great job, and then the civil servants got their hands on it. And they took it a section from the Charities Act, which states that charities cannot promote a political cause unless it is directly related to their aims. Now, the civil servants, for whatever reason, I'm not going to go into that now, they actually took out the second clause, so now the HEI is not able to promote a political cause. Now, Andrew Radigan, one of our fellow HEI members, took issue with this, and he posted a letter on Atheist Ireland, which you can look up, basically calling for an EGM and saying we've kneecapped ourselves, we can't be politically active anymore if we sign up to this act. The board were very dubious, and they actually sent out a letter to every HEI member in the country, and they gave their own side, which was very biased, and had a ballot enclosed which asked the members to endorse their own position. Most people signed yes, because of course you would after reading such a biased document. And then Andrew sent out his letter then. But luckily Andrew has got the letters back. He's got the necessary 10%, and EGM is going to happen. And basically what he proposed was that we just have a discussion about it. Discussion is good. We're all, reasonable people. The board is trying to clamp down on the discussion of this. In terms of where the Cork Humanists is coming from, Andrew's letter has basically been a focal point, a rallying cry for people who are disenfranchised within the humanist movement in Ireland. And we've got together and we've set up a HEI reform group, and we're going to, the fifth motion that Andrew proposed was the election of new officers. So a couple of us are going to run, and hopefully we'll get numbers on the board and we'll start making real changes. Like the Cork Humanists actually becoming a branch of the Humanist Association of Ireland. Personally, where I'm coming from would be I'm going to be pushing the reform agenda. I'll be standing personally, and if anybody would be interested in becoming a board director of the Humanist Association of Ireland, you can come up and talk to me afterwards. Believe me, it's not as big a deal as you think it is. I had a lot of respect for any national board of directors, like you think, like, oh wow, the board of directors, they got to know what they're doing. Believe me, that is truly not the case. I realised that over the course of 2 years. So hopefully, all that would be involved would be travelling up to Dublin every 6 weeks to attend the board of directors meeting, and then hopefully after 3 or 4 meetings we'll have a conference call system set up, and we can all have a meeting outside from various different locations all over the country, which would make HEI a truly national organisation. Sorry, I usually am not that long-winded, but it's just kind of the news that's happening at the moment, and we'll probably have serious repercussions for the history of humanism into the future. I'll probably send out an email in that regard because it's just so complicated. Hopefully, and it will include more detail. Okay, so getting to the main event. I have been looking forward to this talk for ages. I'm a bit of a fan of Colm's for setting up the Cork Sceptics. I've gone to a few meetings, I really respect what he does. When did we meet?
Was it 2 years ago?
Was it Dan Dennis?
Yeah.
It was Dan Dennis, yeah. It was Dan Dennis. Which is a big event in Cork, it was great. So, without further ado, Colm Ryan.
Don't clap yet. You may not be clapping, but I want to take back your claps later on. Yeah, I'm going to kind of talk about this. It's fairly open, but I was going to call it the Tales of the Bad Skeptic. You know, because I'm just going to give an idea about how I got into this. You know, and maybe talk a little bit about skepticism as well, and some of the events in Cork Sceptics, and some of the interesting speakers and speeches that we've had over the last couple of years. I mean, I don't think I'm that different from a lot of people I've met who have been involved in skepticism for a long time. When I was a teenager, I was into UFOs, and I was into pyramids, and I was in, you know, this pyramids, you put a piece of cheese underneath a pyramid and to keep it perfectly preserved. Cosmic joke was another one, you know, that God has this way of giving you signs in the sky and all this kind of stuff. And there was magazines around in the early 80s, you know, Tales of the Unexplained and all this kind of stuff, which really, you know, made you think, wow, you know, life is really crazy, and it's got, you know, all this stuff that's happening that we don't realise, and, you know, everything's a big conspiracy theory. And this really, I was eating this stuff up when I was a teenager. And but on one other side, I was also very interested. I was a bit of a geek. I was very interested in maths and science, and it was something that I had, you know, I would be, you know, loved maths, you know. And that's kind of a strange thing to say, but it was one of those things that I kind of got, and it was something that I loved when I was in secondary school and all the rest of it. And I loved science as well, stars, planets, anything to do with that. So it was a bit of a juxtaposition, and there was one guy who wrote some really, really good books on maths and kind of problems and stuff like that. He used to write for Scientific American, and his name was Martin Gardner, very, very well known individual. He used to kind of give people logic puzzles to solve, and a lot of it was very, very good. And I bought a couple of his books. But one book I bought of his was quite different. It was this one, I still have it. It's called Fads and Fallacies in the Name of Science. And when I was reading through it, he basically blew to pieces all of this pyramidology and biorhythms and homeopathy and everything. Just went through every single one of these kind of ideas with a fine-tooth comb, and was saying this in alternative medicine, you know, that's great, but you need to understand this and you need to understand that. And essentially he introduced me to skepticism at the age of about 19 or 20. It was a real eye-opener. I mean, to me this was more interesting than all that stuff about, you know, flying saucers and all this stuff. You know, really it was proper criticism of that whole genre. And this was written in 1956. This is a very, very old book on the subject, much, much earlier than what we call the skeptical movement. And, you know, another thing was interesting, Loch Ness Monster, you know, so I went to Loch Ness and it was looking, you know, binoculars and all the rest of it. And I also picked up another book at the time, and, you know, again, just kind of, you know, it was a critical reading of the whole Loch Ness phenomenon. It was basically saying, you know, there's a surgeon up in Scotland who's laughing, must have been laughing every single day because of he produced that iconic picture of the kind of the head of the Loch Ness Monster. And, like, that was, you know, the main reason why everybody was talking about a plesiosaur in Loch Ness. And, you know, here was a guy here was another book which basically blew it all apart and said, you know, this is just a modern cultural phenomenon. And what's interesting, I got really into it. I started saying, wow, this is kind of interesting that there's a whole, and you see, you know, when it comes to UFOs and alien visitations and Bigfoot and all that stuff, you only need to turn on the television. You only need to turn on the television any day to see people parrot this stuff off. To actually find out stuff that's critical or takes another, an alternative, you will not see that. Almost never. on television. You never see that in a lot of popular cultural magazines and stuff like that. Scepticism is one of those things that certainly back in the 80s was something you'd never hear about, and even today it wouldn't be something.
I think people think it's almost like spoiling the fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as if we're kind of big spoiled sports.
Yeah,
exactly. But I found it really interesting that there was a kind of another angle being presented with all this. But I was interested in skepticism. I was also very, very deeply committed Christian, very, very, very strong Catholic at the time. Got offended by the life of Brian. Remember that? Yeah, that was me, right? So I was really, really strongly, and even all the way through college, I would have gone to Mass every single Sunday and everything like that. So I would always call myself a bit of a bad skeptic, you know what I mean? If it wasn't for the fact that I'd maybe read some of these books, I'd probably be a priest or something. But I also, when I was in college, I think there was just the kind of things were beginning to break down. That kind of, you know, strong indoctrination that I had when I was a kid was beginning to break down. I got interested in Carl Sagan. He wrote a great novel called Contact. I don't know if you've seen it. That's all about, you know, communicating with aliens and all this stuff.
They made a movie with Jodie Foster.
Yeah, it's exactly the same one. Yeah, his book was superb. If you have never read that book, Contact, even if you've seen the film, the book itself is really, really wonderful. And you know, again, he was poking a little bit at maybe some of the kind of preconceived notions that I would have had, and and then I was in America. I went to America for a J1 over in Ohio, and a guy was driving me to work. You know, I never heard of creationism until I went to Ohio. And the guy driving me to work he had a radio on. I think he was trying to, he was quite a very nice guy. I think he was silently trying to indoctrinate me into Southern Baptist preaching. And he had these Baptist preachers, and they were going, there is no law in any book. There's nothing. You know, all the information you need to know is in the Bible. You know, this is, you know, one of the root doctrines of Southern Baptism. And I just couldn't believe that people out there actually believed that the world was created in 7 days and it all happened 6,000 years ago. You know, that again really caused me to kind of really question what the hell was going on. And I didn't become non-religious until after college. You know, I didn't actually. You know, it was one of those kind of what do you call it? Damascene kind of, you know.
Road to Damascus.
Yeah, kind of road to Damascus type of thing, where, you know, suddenly a friend of mine, said to me, we were having this big discussion on a boat coming back from France, and a bit of drink involved, and he said to me, you know, do you think that there will ever be such a thing as robot intelligence? You know, well, this is the kind of stuff I was talking about, you know. But anyway, it was a lot of drink. But he says, I said, yeah, I think somewhere along the way, you know, you could actually potentially build a machine that, you know, even nowadays we have machines that can kind of mimic human intelligence in some ways. So we're getting there. So I said, yeah, why not? You know, what if you do if you turn it off? You know, it was like, does it go to heaven? It was like, of course not. Of course not. Just be stupid. You know, think about that one. You know, and actually it did. It was one of those things that's just enough kind of straw on the camel's back to make me realise, hold on a second. Hold on a second, you know. So I became quite irreligious very, very quickly after that, that's all I can say. And, you know, it was all really, it didn't start it, you know, to get interested in this and kind of questioning a lot of kind of what I'd been brought up to understand, what I'd been led to understand or believe when I was all the way through school. I read a lot more Carl Sagan, and this is another book that I came across in the mid-90s, which is The Demon Haunted World, where Carl Sagan, does anybody not know who Carl Sagan is? He was an astronomer who, he was a very, very well-educated man, was involved in the nuclear project in, you know, the post-war nuclear kind of, you know, bringing up, but also as an astrophysicist, and he was involved in a lot of the kind of, America made huge leaps of kind of understanding the universe, and he was also very heavily involved in the Voyager craft that went out to Jupiter and Neptune and is currently departing from the solar system as we speak. So he had a huge, very, very well-respected scientist, but he wrote this book in the 1990s saying, you know, the world's going a bit crazy. He says that this UFO thing and this kind of Bigfoot thing and alternative medicine and alternative lifestyles and everything, naturopaths and everything like that, it's really beginning to take over. It's beginning to really get a beachhead in national consciousness. And he was worried that this is going to affect the education of kids. That people weren't aware of this. That there was alternative ideas and alternative therapies, and they were starting to move into the universities. They were starting to become considered to be like mainstream education. And he was saying, listen, we want to watch it because we've spent the last 2,000 years as a civilization getting away from that, you know, and people are blindly walking into a post-scientific society and back into magic again, you know, that's the magical thinking and magical ideas. This is a really good book, by the way, and some of it is shocking. He talks about the Orkney child abuse case, if anybody's ever heard of that. This group of people in Scotland who believed that children were being taken away by satanic cults in the middle of the night and that they were being abused and all this stuff. They actually got caught on so much that social workers came along, grabbed the children from the houses and relocated them without say-so from the parents. And once it was realised that the whole thing was complete and utter rubbish, that it caused a huge amount of thinking. And he said, that's witchcraft. He says, just witch hunting has just reappeared, and we have to be very, very much on the lookout for it. So some of it, but it is an excellent book, and it does kind of set down these two books really in many ways. They set down the basis of what skepticism is all about, giving people an understanding about what the key issues in skepticism are. It has moved on quite a way, and I'll kind of get back into it. The other thing as well is that I was big into Douglas Adams. Anybody know who Douglas Adams is? You know, I have a huge interest in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and all of these books that he's written. He was a remarkable mind who was also a very, very strong skeptic. I often think, you know, the skeptic movement really took off just after he died, and I think that's a terrible shame, you know, because he was a very, very strong skeptic. And a lot of his books really is kind of a send-up of, you know, lazy thinking really, in terms of how that whole thing happens. Another person as well, I think, who was very highly influential on me was James Randi. Now, James Randi is a magician. He's not a scientist. He's a magician. But that's a picture of him there. He's a small little man. He's about that high. He's in his 80s now. But Randi was very, very skeptical, and very skeptical of, you know, all sorts of kind of alternative claims. You know, his basic view was that, you know, there's no evidence for some of these people. He's a magician, and one of the things about magicians is that they get very irritated by psychics. They don't like psychics very much. The reason is that they're doing the same stuff that psychics do, except they're saying, hey, it's all a trick, guys. It's all a trick. I'm tricking you. Whereas the psychics say, really, the magical powers exist. They really do exist. I'm kind of manipulating your brains, and, you know, there's all this stuff going on. Whereas the magician says it's a trick. But they get very annoyed because they're using the same parlor tricks. The psychics are using the same parlor tricks as the magicians do. And he wrote a number of books. Flim Flam is one of them. Faith Healers is another. He had a blog called Swift. I think it's still going, where he used to deconstruct a lot of these kind of claims and say, you know, all of this is happening. He was pretty much on his own during the 1990s, and then he set up big conferences called TAM, the Amazing Meeting, because he's called the Amazing Randy, is his kind of is his thing. He also, one of the interesting things about Randy is that he fooled a whole lot of scientists. There was a big experiment going on, I think it was in the 1960s, in one of the universities in America, where they were trying to. The scientists believed that they had now evidence that extrasensory perception, you know, psychic powers existed. They had basically said, yeah, we've written up the paper, we've done the experiments, we really do think ESP exists. And Randy got got information about this, and him and a couple of other magicians decided that they were going to sabotage the experiment by essentially showing, pretending to them that the psychic powers existed, and then when they had published the paper, or when they had basically said yes, psychic powers existed, basically doing big denouement and saying, no, it was all trickery. And he got quite notorious, but what he actually proved was that scientists can be fooled. Which was a very, very big statement. Scientists needed to really, really watch their experimental procedures, because if they didn't, somebody who knew what they were doing could actually fool them. So it was a big kind of opening up of, where the scientists realized, we can learn something from these magicians. They really know how the human brain works. They certainly have a good idea about how the human brain can be fooled, otherwise they wouldn't be in their profession. And so he has become a little bit of a kind of a hero of the skeptical movement, because he has been very forthright about psychics and frauds and everything like that, and he's gone out on a limb to make sure that somebody say, Uri Geller, I don't know if any of you remember Uri Geller.
Yeah.
He was the arch nemesis of Uri Geller. He'd do things like Uri Geller would say, I can bend spoons and all the rest of it, and then he would say, fine, let's go on to the Johnny Carson show, and let's see if Uri Geller can bend spoons in a specially controlled experiment, and Uri Geller could never do it, and it was like, oh yeah, it's not a good day, or maybe the lights are too bright or something like that. He was, Randy is a bit of a kind of a hero really for the skeptical movement, and he's still very active. I hope I'm as active as him when I reach the age of 84.
Isn't there a fund, isn't there? Or the James Randi?
The James Randi Educational Foundation, yeah, it just helps to kind of...
They have €1 million or $1 million
the million
prize.
That's right. So they're basically saying, if you have psychic powers, you genuinely believe you've got psychic powers, or that the supernatural exists, come along and talk to us, and we'll set up an experiment with your consent as to what the procedures are going to be. We will go through exactly what the procedures are, and then we will test your skills. And and as a person who believes in it, you're encouraged to believe that all of this. You're encouraged to. You need to accept that the procedures are right. We're not going to do anything that would be kind of, smoke and mirrors or anything behind the scenes. We will do exactly what we say we're going to do in the experiment, and so long as you're okay with that, you're on. If you win and you're able to prove beyond reasonable doubt that your powers actually exist, you will get $1 million. And basically what they set up is what's known as a random double-blind experiment, which means that neither the subject nor the people who are setting the experiment really know what's there, and you're able to very quickly come up with a kind of statistical model that shows that you couldn't have got there by chance, or it was no different to chance. It was no different to chance in any psychic power, sorry. But if there's a marked difference between what you would be expected by chance and what would be expected by you doing it, then maybe further research is warranted. Loads of dowsers.
Yeah, I saw some of the experiments with dowsers where they were walking around.
Dowsers are, the guys with their metal rods, who go along the field looking for water, and a lot of them are convinced that what they've got is something that is correct. I'll get back into dowsing later on because it's interesting. But they walk around and they find water. They've got two usually kind of floating bars. The bars cross where water exists. And, they say, well, you dig here and the water, you'll find water. In Ireland, it's kind of water's everywhere. Underneath us, the ground is kind of sodden and wet, only a couple of metres below us, so it's not the most difficult thing in the world. But they don't genuinely believe it, and they do it, and they do a double-blinded experiment, usually using buckets, and the big jar of water under some buckets, and not under other buckets, and they go along, and some of them, basically the hits and the misses are just as what you'd expect by chance. They have never kind of come up with somebody who's spot on. You think, this should be something fairly easy for if the dowsing rods existed properly. But you know, once they're shielded from potential other signals, and once you kind of said, okay, let's get to the core of this, is there water under that bucket or not, it becomes much more difficult for them to prove that what they're doing. I'll get back to dowsing because it's an interesting one. You would think it is the most, who are they hurting? Who's the dowser hurting, right? You know, there's no bands of mad dowsers running around the place massacring children in their beds, right? It's not something you'd expect to be a dangerous pursuit, but in the wrong hands, you'd be surprised.